The stars had always been humanity's greatest treasure, a constant reminder of the unyielding reach of their civilization. But now those stars were growing dim. News from the colonies came less and less frequently, and when it did, it was often a cryptic message, just static, followed by an eerie silence. Entire planets vanished, entire fleets disappeared into the abyss, leaving no trace behind. No one knew why. No one knew how. Humanity, once the dominant force in the galaxy, was unraveling. On board the Vanguard, Captain Ezra Holt stood in the command center, gazing out at the void through the viewports. The vast, endless blackness of space stretched before him, a cold reminder of what they were up against. His crew, though capable, had begun to show the strain of their long voyage. Morale was slipping, and with it, the hope that they could uncover the cause of the disappearances. They had already lost contact with 3 major colonies, Terra Nova, Arcturus, and Alpha Centauri, and now they were heading toward the final known location of the Perseverance, a fleet of human warships that had gone dark months ago. The Vanguard was humanity's last operational warship, and Holt was its sole commander. Every decision he made now carried the weight of the entire human race. "Captain," a voice broke through his thoughts. Lieutenant Rhea, his communications officer, stood at attention, her face pale. "Another transmission from Delta Station. They're reporting the same thing. The station is gone." Gone. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Holt turned to face her, his jaw tightening. He'd heard that word more times in the past few months than he cared to remember. "What's left?" "Nothing, sir. No debris, no trace of the station. It's as if it was erased." "Erased?" Holt repeated, his brow furrowing. "Nothing can just disappear. There has to be an explanation." Rhea shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "Captain, this is beyond anything we've ever encountered. We've combed through every possible scenario, natural disasters, cosmic anomalies. But this is something else, something we don't understand." The unease in her voice was palpable, and Holt could feel it in his own chest, a growing knot of dread. But he had no time for fear. The universe wasn't waiting for answers, and neither was humanity. "Prepare the crew for departure," he ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "We're heading to the last known location of the Perseverance. Whatever this is, we'll face it head-on. This ends now." His words were firm, but even he knew that whatever was out there, whatever was taking entire colonies and fleets, was not something they were prepared for. The Vanguard was one of humanity's finest ships, but no matter how advanced their technology was, there were forces in the universe far beyond their control. As Holt turned and walked toward the command chair, his mind wandered to the stories he had heard in his youth, the tales of ancient civilizations, gods, and monsters that once roamed the galaxy, now forgotten. Were those stories more than just myths? Was something older, something darker, awakening from its slumber? "Captain," Rhea's voice cut through his musings again, this time with urgency. "We're picking up something on the edge of the system. It's not a ship, it's too large to be anything we've ever encountered, and it's moving toward us." Holt's heart skipped a beat. Whatever it was coming for them. "Ready all defenses," he commanded, his voice cold. "Prepare for engagement." The crew scrambled to their stations, but Holt could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. Fear wasn't just in the air, it was palpable. They were no longer just investigating an anomaly. They were facing something that could very well be the end of everything. "Whatever it is," Holt muttered to himself, "we're going to find out what's behind this, or die trying." As the Vanguard approached the darkened edge of the system, Holt's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. The endless void outside the viewport was no longer empty. It was a waiting predator, and humanity's last hope was about to face whatever lay hidden in its depths. The unknown presence on the edge of the system grew closer, its sheer size impossible to ignore. Holt could feel the hairs on the back of his neck rise as the ship's sensors blinked erratically. The Vanguard shuddered slightly as the dark mass moved toward them, too large, too ominous, and entirely outside the scope of their understanding. The crew had been trained for war, for enemies with clear forms and intentions, but this was something new, something they hadn't prepared for. "Captain," Rhea's voice came through the comms, a tremor of unease in her tone. "We're picking up." A burst of static interrupted her. Then a soft, almost inaudible whisper echoed through the ship's intercom system. "Come closer." Holt's stomach churned. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way they understood life. The transmission was distorted, like a dead frequency caught in a loop, yet it had a strange resonance, like it was calling to them. "Revert all systems to manual," Holt barked, his voice steady despite the cold fear that twisted inside him. "I don't like the look of this." "Understood, sir," Rhea responded quickly, her fingers flying over her controls as the ship's systems flickered, now operating under emergency protocols. The whispers continued, soft and insidious, growing louder with each passing moment. Holt could feel them pressing against his mind, tugging at the edges of his thoughts. For a moment, the crew seemed frozen, staring at the view screens in morbid curiosity. They couldn't see anything, only a vast emptiness, but the sense of something other lingered like a shadow over the ship. "Get me a visual now," Holt demanded. Rhea hesitated for just a moment, and then her voice rang out, sharp and clear. "There, on the sensors, something massive. It's not a ship, not anything we've encountered before." On the screen, a gargantuan, shifting form began to materialize in the inky blackness, a mass of undulating shadows, like the very fabric of space had been twisted and folded into a shape that defied understanding. The object was vaguely spherical, but it seemed to pulse as if it were alive in some way. Black tendrils of energy spiraled outward, curling like fingers reaching toward the Vanguard, but when they touched nothing, they disappeared back into the void. The crew gasped, unsure of what to make of the shape before them. Holt's eyes narrowed as he studied it, his mind struggling to comprehend the sight. What in the universe could create something like that? What kind of creature could exist in the dark void of space, hidden until now? "Weapons are online, sir," Lieutenant Jace, the weapons officer, said, his voice tight. "Ready to fire on your command." "Hold fire," Holt ordered. The last thing they needed was to provoke something they couldn't understand. His mind raced. There was a history here, a knowledge buried deep in the archives of the fleet, something about entities that existed in the spaces between stars, beyond the boundaries of known reality. But his mind was foggy, the whispers were clouding his thoughts. It was like being pulled into something ancient and unknowable. Then, without warning, the void itself seemed to shift. The presence grew more pronounced, a flicker of light, then another, a third, and then a series of rapid pulses of energy radiated from the dark mass, crashing against the Vanguard shields with enough force to rattle the ship to its core. "Shields holding," Rhea called out, her voice strained. But the pulse had left something behind. A wave of cold, like the freezing chill of death, swept through the ship. Holt's breath quickened, his heart pounding. The lights flickered. And then the whispers, now a full chorus, seemed to invade his mind. They weren't just on the comms anymore. They were inside his head. "You are nothing." The voice was both alien and eerily familiar, and it wasn't just in his head. The crew could hear it too, but no one spoke. They were all frozen, unable to respond, as if the entity was slowly pulling them into its grasp. Suddenly, the ship's systems began to fail. Navigation, communication, life support, all flickering and stuttering as the presence outside seemed to feed on their very existence. Holt's fingers clenched the armrests of his command chair. "Rhea," he barked, trying to fight the grip the whispers had on him. "Send out an emergency distress signal. Now." "I can't, sir," Rhea's voice came through, weak. "The system's compromised." The cold began to seep into the room, and Holt knew then they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. A force so ancient, it had no concept of mercy, no desire for anything but the erasure of everything in its path. And it was getting closer. The vanguard groaned as the dark mass outside pressed harder against its shields, threatening to tear them apart. Holt could feel his pulse quicken, his mind struggling to break free from the suffocating grip of the whispers that filled the ship. Every instinct told him to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The creature, or whatever it was everywhere. Even the stars outside seemed to dim, swallowed by an encroaching shadow that clung to their ship. "Status report," Holt snapped, his voice laced with urgency. "Shields at 60%, Captain," Rhea responded, her fingers furiously working on the control panel. "We won't last long at this rate." "I know," Holt muttered, his mind racing. They couldn't survive a prolonged confrontation with an entity like this. The ship was too small, too fragile to face something that seemed to transcend the laws of physics. But there was something that kept nagging at him. The whispers had grown clearer now, their words seeping into his thoughts as if they knew exactly what he was thinking. "You are the last of your kind." Holt shook his head, trying to block out the voice. He couldn't let it distract him, not now. His gaze fell to the data console in front of him. The ancient alien archives. Somewhere in those lost texts, there had to be something that could help him understand what they were up against. Something that could point him toward a way to fight back. "Rhea," Holt said urgently, his voice snapping into focus. "We need access to the archives now, the backup systems. Bring them online." Rhea nodded, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Aye, sir, but the databanks are still corrupted. I'll need a few minutes to bypass the security protocols." "Do it," Holt said, his voice low and steady. "I'll handle the rest." He turned toward the view screen, staring out at the formless, shifting void that surrounded them. The vanguard was trapped, its systems failing one by one. Yet the creature outside wasn't attacking them directly. It was watching, waiting, as if it were toying with them, enjoying their terror. Holt felt a chill run down his spine. "We are your salvation." The words echoed through his mind again, this time softer, more coaxing. Holt's jaw tightened. It was tempting to listen, to believe, but he couldn't it. He had seen too much of humanity's resilience, too much of its drive to survive. No alien force, no matter how ancient, could erase them so easily. "Holt," a voice interrupted his thoughts, breaking through the disorienting whispers. It was Commander Nix, his second in command. "We've got a possible lead. There's an anomaly in the sensor logs, something about an ancient alien civilization that might have fought against this." Holt's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Nix stepped forward, her face grim. "It's a long shot, but we might be able to find some kind of weapon, something that could stand against whatever's out there. It's hidden on a planet, a lost world. But the logs suggest the civilization that created it disappeared." "A weapon," Holt repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned back to the screen, eyeing the swirling darkness. He didn't believe in coincidences. This couldn't be just an ancient myth. If there was even the slightest chance, they had to take it. "We're going to find it," Holt said, his tone ironclad. "Prepare a course for the coordinates. We'll need everything we've got to get there before it's too late." Nix nodded. "Aye, Captain." "Rhea," Holt continued, "keep working on those archives. We need to know everything, anything, that could help us fight this, whatever it is." "We're still getting interference," Rhea replied, her fingers dancing across her controls. "It's almost like it's trying to stop us." "Then we'll push harder," Holt said, his resolve hardening. "I didn't come this far to give up now." With the course set in the Vanguard's remaining systems reluctantly sputtering to life, Holt made the decision. They would pursue this lost world. If humanity had any hope of surviving, it was there. in the relics of a civilization long gone. But Holt couldn't shake the feeling that they were not just racing against time. They were racing against something older, something that had been waiting for eons. As the ship lurched forward, the whispers seemed to grow louder again, this time more desperate, more insistent. "You cannot run," but Holt didn't respond. He couldn't afford to. The future of humanity was at stake, and the Vanguard was all that stood between them and the dark. With a final glance at the view screen, Holt set his sights on the unknown, determined to unlock the secrets of the past to secure the future of his people. The Vanguard cut through the blackness of space, its damaged engines humming weakly as the crew braced themselves for the long journey ahead. Holt sat in the command chair, his eyes scanning the console as the ship's systems flickered intermittently. The whispers had not stopped. They had only grown louder, more persistent, clawing at the edges of his mind. Every crew member had their own battle to fight, but Holt knew the true danger lay not just in the enemy outside, but in the insidious voices that threatened to unravel their sanity from within. "Captain," Nix said, her voice strained as she studied the sensor readouts. "We're approaching the outer rim of the system. The readings are strange. The gravitational fields in this region are unlike anything we've encountered." "Strange?" Holt echoed, his brow furrowing. "How?" "The anomaly we're heading toward, it's not just a planet. The readings suggest a massive structure buried beneath the surface, but it's irregular, almost like it's been engineered by something not of this universe. It could be a relic of the civilization we're searching for." Holt leaned forward, feeling the weight of Nix's words settle over him. "That's our target, then. We don't know how much time we have before the Nihilists, whatever they are, find us. Get us as close as possible." "Aye, sir," Nix replied, her fingers tapping rapidly on the console as she adjusted their course. For hours, the ship drifted deeper into the unexplored sector, the dense nebula clouds growing thicker around them, obscuring any potential view of the distant world they sought. The Vanguard had long passed the point of being a pristine warship. It was barely holding together now, its outer hull scorched from previous battles, its engines limping as they fought to keep the ship moving forward. Yet the crew remained determined, knowing that this was humanity's last chance. Rhea, still working in the communications bay, looked up from her station with a concerned expression. "Captain, I've been running diagnostics on the ship's internal systems. Something's wrong. I can't isolate it, but there's an influence. It's like the ship itself is resonating with the entity out there." "What kind of resonance?" Holt asked, his voice low but urgent. "It's hard to explain, sir," she replied, her eyes flicking nervously between the readouts. "It's almost like the ship is alive, or like it's trying to communicate with something otherworldly." Holt stood, his mind racing. The whispers, the creature outside, they were all connected. The ship was responding to them in ways it shouldn't have been able to. Something was manipulating their course, drawing them closer to the planet. But Holt knew that in this galaxy, no matter how far humanity had come, they were still at the mercy of forces beyond comprehension. Before he could respond, the ship shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. "Report," Holt barked as the crew struggled to regain their footing. "Shields are destabilizing, Captain." Rhea's voice came through, panic in her tone. "The gravitational pull is increasing. We're being pulled in. Evasive maneuvers now," Holt ordered, gripping the arms of his chair as the ship was thrown into a chaotic spin. Nix's voice was tight as she fought the controls. "It's no use. We're being drawn into the anomaly's orbit. The hull is cracking, Captain. We can't break free." The lights flickered once more, and for a moment, Holt felt as though the ship was suspended in time. Outside, the swirling mass of stars seemed to twist and distort as if reality itself were bending in on them. The presence of the entity was closing in, its dark influence suffocating every inch of space. "We're close to the surface, sir," Nix gasped. I can see the structure on the planet's surface. It's enormous. Through the viewport, Holt glimpsed the faint silhouette of the planet below. The structure was barely visible at first, but as they descended further into the atmosphere, its sheer size became apparent. The ruins were vast, sprawling across miles of barren land, a city of strange, angular shapes and designs that made no sense. It was a place of ancient power, built by a civilization lost to time. But more than that, Holt could feel it. This was where it all started. The whispers, the entity, the disappearances. It had all been leading them here. "We're landing," Nick said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Brace for impact." The Vanguard lurched violently, slamming onto the planet's surface with a force that nearly buckled the hull. The ship groaned under the strain, but it held together. Holt's eyes were fixed on the planet outside. The last hope of humanity lay within those alien ruins. He knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, it felt as though the universe had taken a breath. "Everyone, prepare to disembark," Holt commanded, his voice hard as stone. "We find the weapon, or we don't leave this planet alive." The Vanguard settled with a heavy thud on the barren ground, the ship's landing struts sinking into the cracked, dust-covered surface of the alien world. Outside, a strange, ominous quiet hung in the air. The planet, once teeming with life, was now a wasteland of jagged stone and ruins. Towering spires of what looked like ancient architecture rose from the desolate landscape, their surfaces covered in layers of dust and time, their shapes both alien and eerily familiar. "Captain," Nex's voice cut through the silence, "I'm reading multiple heat signatures within the ruins. They're weak, but they're there." "Is it the structure?" Holt asked, his gaze fixed on the dark, monolithic ruins in the distance. Something in his gut told him they weren't alone, not truly. "No, sir," Nyx replied, her voice tinged with unease. "This is different. Whatever they are, they're inside the structure. We'll have to get closer to find out." Holt's lips pressed into a thin line. It was the first real sign of activity they had encountered since landing. The creature outside, the Neolith, it had drawn them here for a reason. They couldn't let fear paralyze them now. If there was any hope left for humanity, it lay within those ruins. "Get the team ready," Holt ordered. "We go in now." The crew, already on high alert, suited up and prepared to leave the safety of the Vanguard. They knew what they were facing, an alien force capable of wiping entire colonies from existence, and a long-forgotten weapon hidden beneath the surface of this desolate world. It was a fragile hope, but it was all they had left. Holt, Nyx, Rhea, and the rest of the team exited the ship, stepping into the ashen landscape. The air was thin, dry, and acrid, with a sharp metallic tang that burned their nostrils. The planet seemed dead, its surface cracked and scarred by centuries of neglect. The ruins ahead beckoned them like a tomb, its dark shadows stretching across the ground like the fingers of an ancient hand. "We'll follow the thermal signatures," Holt instructed, his voice low but firm. "Stay sharp." The team moved in silence, their footsteps crunching in the dust as they made their way toward the distant ruins. The heat signatures on their scanners grew stronger as they approached, but they weren't human. They were something else, something that defied classification. As they neared the entrance of the massive structure, Holt's breath caught in his throat. The doorway, though ancient and covered in strange symbols, stood wide open, as if waiting for them. There was no sign of life outside, no movement or indication of the source of the heat signatures. It was as if the ruin itself had been emptied, or had it always been this way? "It's too quiet," Rhea whispered, her voice tense as she scanned the area. "I don't like it." "We press on," Holt said, his jaw tight. "We don't have the luxury of second-guessing now." Inside, the ruin was far larger than it appeared from the outside. Massive columns of smooth black stone stretched into the darkness, illuminated only by the dim light filtering in through cracks in the structure. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly glow. The air inside felt charged, like static electricity humming just beneath the surface. Holt's skin prickled as he glanced around, his senses on high alert. "This doesn't look like a place of worship," Nyx observed, her voice echoing in the cavernous interior. "It's more like a lab or a weapons facility." "I agree," Holt said, eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Whatever they were working on here, it wasn't peaceful. They pressed forward, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The deeper they went, the more intense the heat signatures became, until they found themselves standing before a massive door, a sealed chamber at the heart of the ruins. This was it, the place they had been searching for. The door was covered in the same strange symbols they had seen earlier, and as Rhea stepped forward to examine it, she frowned. "There's something here, some kind of lock. It's not just mechanical, it's—" Before she could finish, the door groaned and began to slide open on its own, revealing the chamber beyond. The heat signatures they had been tracking were strongest here. Inside, the chamber was vast, and at its center stood a pedestal. On it, an object, something that pulsed with a cold, dark energy, lay suspended in a force field. Its shape was angular, almost crystalline, but the dark aura surrounding it made it look more like a weapon than anything else. As Holt stepped closer, his heart skipped a beat. The whispers that had been echoing in his mind since they arrived grew louder. "This is it, the weapon." The whispers weren't just coming from the entity outside anymore. They were coming from within the chamber. The weapon, whatever it was alive. The chamber seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the air thick with tension. Holt and his crew stood motionless, eyes fixed on the dark object suspended in the center of the room. The energy emanating from it was unlike anything they had ever encountered, an almost palpable force, as though the object was a gateway, a conduit to something far older and far more powerful than they could imagine. The whispers in Holt's mind had become deafening, growing louder with each step closer to the pedestal. Take it, and end the suffering." The voice was deep, ancient, and seductive. Holt's hand twitched, as if it were being pulled toward the object against his will. He forced himself to resist the compulsion, taking a slow, deliberate step back. "Rhea, is the force field the only barrier?" Holt asked, his voice steady despite the gnawing feeling of dread that curled in his gut. Rhea was already at her console, furiously typing in commands, her face a mask of concentration. "Yes, sir. The field is locking the object in place. It's not like anything I've seen before. The energy signatures are fluctuating, but I should be able to override it." "Make it quick," Holt said, his eyes never leaving the object. He could feel the pull growing stronger, the whispers wrapping around his mind, urging him to act. "We don't know how much time we have." Rhea nodded and continued working, her brow furrowed as she attempted to decode the alien technology. The object seemed to respond to her presence, its dark energy shifting, writhing like a living thing. Holt could almost hear the whispers now, clearer than ever. "You are the last of your kind. Take it and bring an end to the void." The force behind the voice was overwhelming, almost suffocating. Holt could feel his resolve slipping, his thoughts clouded by the pull of the object. A part of him screamed to turn away, to abandon it all before it was too late. But another part, deeper, primal, wanted to claim the power for humanity. The whispers promised them victory, the end of the Nihilith threat, the annihilation of the void. It was everything they had fought for, everything they had lost. "Rhea, any time now," Nyx snapped, breaking Holt from his trance. "I'm trying." Rhea's voice trembled. "This is unlike any encryption I've ever seen. It's almost like the object is alive, reacting to my commands." The room hummed with an eerie vibration, and the object on the pedestal seemed to shimmer, its dark energy swirling in tight, controlled spirals. It was as though it was waiting, anticipating something. Holt's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure how much longer he could fight the pull. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to claim the power, to wield it against the Nihilists. Finally, with a soft chime, the force field flickered and dissipated, leaving the object exposed on the pedestal. Rhea stepped back, breathing heavily. "It's down. It's yours, Captain." Holt took a slow, measured step forward, his eyes locked on the dark artifact. As his fingers brushed the surface, a jolt of cold energy shot through him, flooding his senses. The whispers erupted into a cacophony of voices, each one echoing through his skull, pressing against his thoughts. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he saw flashes of strange worlds, alien landscapes teeming with horrors and civilizations that had come and gone. It was as if the object held the memories of 1,000 forgotten empires. "You are the last Crusader." Holt's grip tightened on the object, and a surge of power coursed through him. He could feel it, raw, untamed, and dangerous. The energy was vast, too vast to comprehend. His body shuddered with the weight of it, but he held firm, forcing the power back into his control. The whispers began to quiet, but the feeling of alien presence lingered. "Captain, are you all right?" Nex's voice broke through the haze in his mind. She stepped forward cautiously, her eyes scanning his face. "You've got it, haven't you?" Holt blinked, the vision fading from his mind, and looked down at the object in his hand. It was a crystalline shard, jagged and irregular, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. He could feel the power it contained, the same dark force that had been calling to him. "I've got it," he said, his voice low and steady. But even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a grave mistake. There was no turning back now. Suddenly, a low rumble vibrated through the ground. The ruins began to shake, dust and debris falling from the ceiling as the chamber quaked. The wall seemed to shift, as though the structure itself were awakening. Holt's blood ran cold. "It's here," Nyx said, her voice tight with urgency. "The Nihilists. They found us." The ship's emergency alarms blared through the comm system, but it was too late. The presence outside, the dark, malevolent force, was now inside the chamber with them. The battle had only just begun. The chamber trembled violently as the walls seemed to bend under an unseen weight. Holt's grip on the crystalline shard tightened involuntarily as the object pulsed with an ominous cold energy. The whispers had grown into a cacophony, thrumming in his skull, urging him to do something, to unleash the power within. But Holt resisted, forcing his mind to focus on the task at hand. "Captain," Nex's voice cut through the chaos. "The Nihilists are here. They're coming." Holt turned, eyes scanning the room as the tremors escalated. The air grew thick with a sense of impending doom, a darkness that pressed in from every direction. From the shadows beyond the chamber's entrance, forms began to take shape, vague, shifting silhouettes, impossibly tall and thin, their features indiscernible, yet undeniably hostile. The Nihilists. Holt's heart pounded as the shapes emerged, their presence suffocating. The energy in the room seemed to warp, bending around their figures as if the very fabric of space was warping under their influence. The whispers grew louder, now a chant, urging him to release the weapon's full potential. "We need to move," Holt snapped, his voice sharp with urgency. He turned to his team. "Get to the ship. Now." But as his command left his mouth, one of the Nihilists stepped forward, its form rippling with unnatural motion. It was tall, impossibly tall, its black, featureless form flickering like an apparition. Its presence was a void, a tear in reality that consumed all light and warmth around it. The air grew cold, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to groan under its weight. Rhea gasped, taking a step back, her face pale. "What the hell is that thing?" "Nothing good," Nyx muttered under her breath. She raised her weapon, but the Nihilith merely extended its arm. The air shimmered, and in an instant, the weapon was torn from her hands, ripped away by some unseen force. Retreat, Holt shouted, his pulse racing. But even as he spoke, the Neolith raised its other hand, and the very walls of the chamber seemed to respond to its will, closing in like a trap. The team fell back, but the space between them and the entrance closed with impossible speed. They were cornered. "Captain," Rhea said, her voice trembling, "we can't escape. The ship's systems are locked down. It's like the Neoliths are controlling everything." Holt's mind raced. The artifact in his hand was the only thing they had left. Its energy, raw and untamed, had to be the key. His instincts screamed at him to use it, to unleash the power within, but a part of him hesitated. What if the weapon, like everything else on this forsaken world, was beyond their control? What if they were playing right into the Nehelith's hands? But the Neheliths were closing in, their forms warping as they moved, their movements predatory, inevitable. "We have no choice," Holt said, his voice a grim whisper. "Prepare yourselves." He raised the crystalline shard, feeling its unnatural coldness seeping into his skin. The whispers, once a distant hum in his mind, now filled his thoughts completely. Take it. Unleash it. Destroy them all. The power surged within him, thrumming with a terrifying intensity, as if the very universe itself were shuddering in anticipation. Holt's heart raced. He could feel it, his body humming with the artifact's energy, ready to strike, ready to end it all. But as he prepared to release the weapon's power, the Nihiliths stopped. They hovered in place, their gaze, or what passed for a gaze, fixed upon him. The room was deathly silent. Holt's hand trembled, the shard burning against his palm, its power trying to force its way out. "Release me." The voice was not the whispers now, but a singular presence, cold, malevolent. It came from the object itself. "You want me to release you." Holt muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What are you?" The Nihiliths did not answer, but the power of the shard answered for them. Suddenly, the shard pulsed with blinding energy, filling the chamber with a wave of force so powerful it sent Holt flying backward. The blast seemed to tear through reality itself, creating a rift in space-time. The Nihiliths screamed, if they could scream, thrashing violently as the energy engulfed them, their forms distorting as they were torn apart by the sheer force of the blast. The ground cracked and splintered, the walls of the chamber buckling under the pressure. Holt struggled to get to his feet, his mind swirling in confusion, disoriented by the intensity of the surge. He could feel the Nihilith's presence fading, but the cost was apparent. The ship's systems, already failing, were now completely compromised. Rhea scrambled to her feet, her face a mix of awe and fear. "Captain, what have you done?" "I've given us a chance," Holt said, his voice hard but shaken. "But we need to leave now." The Nihiliths were gone, for now, but Holt knew they wouldn't be gone for long. And the true nature of the weapon they had unleashed still loomed over them. There would be no easy victory, only the fight for survival. The chamber was eerily still. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt ozone, and the walls still trembled with the aftershock of the energy burst. Holt felt the oppressive weight of the dark power recede, but it wasn't gone. The artifact still hummed in his hand, as though it had tasted the chaos and was hungry for more. He knew, deep down, that what they had unleashed was not just a weapon, it was a force of nature, ancient and unpredictable, and now it was his responsibility. Rhea approached, her face pale, eyes wide. "Captain, you that—" She struggled for words, her gaze fixed on the shard, which now pulsed with an almost seductive rhythm. "What was that? What did we just do?" Holt took a slow, steadying breath. The aftermath of the attack was disorienting, but he needed clarity. "We survived," he said, his voice low but resolute. "And we've bought ourselves some time." Nyx's voice crackled over the comms, her voice sharp with urgency. "Captain, we've got a problem. The Nihiliths are regrouping. They're regenerating somehow. I think we just delayed the inevitable, but the ship's systems are still offline. and I can't get us out of here without full control." Holt cursed under his breath. The Nihilites were not like anything humanity had faced before. They were relentless, adaptive. The blast had done damage, but it was not a permanent solution. They could regenerate, they could adapt, and soon they would be back at full strength. The ship wasn't going to hold up much longer. "We need to move now," Holt ordered, eyes scanning the darkened interior of the ruined facility. "Find another way out of here. We can't afford to stay." The crew began to move quickly, gathering their gear and checking their weapons, but the sense of urgency was now palpable. The danger wasn't over, it had only just begun. As they exited the chamber, the ground beneath their feet groaned again, a deep rumble that shook the very foundations of the ancient structure. The Nihilites were regenerating, adapting to the force Holt had unleashed. The doorway they had entered was now blocked by debris, no easy escape. "We're trapped," Nex's voice echoed. "The Nihilites are on their way." Holt's mind raced. They had one chance left. Whatever the Nihilites had been guarding, it had to be valuable. This entire structure had been built to protect something. Maybe that something could give them an edge. "Rhea, can you get those systems back online?" Holt asked, his eyes scanning the ruin around them. "I'll try," she said, her voice tense. "But it's going to take time. Then we fight for that time." They moved deeper into the structure, heading toward a control room that Rhea had detected on her scans. The Nihilites were close, too close. Holt could feel the shift in the air, the growing tension. The Nihilites were coming, relentless in their pursuit. "Keep moving," Holt barked, his pace quickening as the first sign of movement appeared in the shadows ahead. The Nihilites were beginning to form again, tall, shadowy figures coalescing from the darkness. Rhea cursed as she tried to override the locked-down systems. "I've got the bypass working, but—" The ground trembled again as the Nihilites emerged fully, their forms flickering like distortions in the fabric of space itself. They were too many. The door to the control room was still closed, and their time was running out. "Captain, there's no way we can fight them all. We need tow." A scream cut through the air. It was Rhea, her body thrown violently against the wall by an unseen force. Holt's heart slammed in his chest. The Nihilites were attacking without hesitation, their power overwhelming. Without thinking, Holt raised the shard. The energy from the object surged through him like a flood, his body flooded with dark power, a tidal wave of energy crashing through every nerve. The artifact's power was more intense than before, and it took every ounce of his will to control it. He felt the connection to the Nihilites, felt their presence on the edge of his mind, their hunger and hatred. "Get down," Holt shouted, just as he released the power. The resulting wave of energy was unlike anything they had encountered. The air snapped and crackled with dark energy as the Nihilites were sent reeling back, their forms twisting and warping under the onslaught. For a moment, the chamber felt like it had been torn apart by the force, reality itself buckling under the strain. But when the energy settled, the Nihilites were gone, dissipated, shattered into nothing. For a brief moment, there was silence. And then the sound of the control room door unlocking. Rhea was on her feet, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They had won for now. Holt took a deep breath, lowering the shard. His hands were shaking from the intensity of what he had just unleashed, but it wasn't over. The Nihilites were a persistent enemy, and this was just a brief respite. There was more to the weapon than he understood, more to the world they had entered. But one thing was certain: humanity's last hope had become something far greater and far darker than they could have ever anticipated. "Let's get to the ship," Holt said quietly. "We're not done yet."